name is Christina Mason, and I would like to welcome you tonight to our presentation on AI. This evening's show is sponsored by the Young Ladies Library Association, of which I happen to be a member. Our presenter is Kathy LeBlanc. She is a professor of digital media at Plymouth State, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background and then give her the show, so to speak. Kathy grew up in Goffstown and went to Dartmouth. And one of the highlights of her time at Dartmouth was being on a Division I softball team.
Oh, wow, you really dug up. Yeah.
When she got her degree, got her bachelor's from Dartmouth, she went into software development, did that for a number of years, and by the way, she lived in Holland for a couple of years. But I'm told, took a sabbatical, and eventually went back to grad school at Florida State, getting 2 degrees, both her master's and her doctorate, in computer science, which makes, let's see, 2 degrees now in computer science, 3 degrees in computer science. Focusing on AI, and she will explain that to you. I am not going to do that. And so in 1977, she took a position at Keene State. Was there for a year.
97.
Did I say 77?
You did.
Oh! I knew I'd make a mistake. 97. But then the following year, she came here to Plymouth in computer science and technology, which I believe she did for about 10 years, and then switched over to communications and media studies, and is now the chair of the Games Program of Studies. And so we are delighted to have her here with us tonight. I just want to mention that I see a lot of us out here who know Kathy from Jazzercise. And there are some other people here tonight who sat across a poker table from her and appreciate her for that. So, without further ado, Kathy.
That introduction, I had no idea that Christina was going to dig up all that stuff. So I want to talk about AI today. So one of the first things I did when I was thinking about talking to you about AI and how it works was I asked ChatGPT. People know what that is? Right? Yeah, you put in prompts and it does things for you. I asked ChatGPT to give me a humanoid image of an AI, and that's what this is, okay? One of the challenges I found of putting this presentation together is that every single day there was more news about AI, and I had to decide I'm not including things. But yesterday, something came across my feed, and I decided I needed to include it. So I subscribed to some newsletters from the New York Times, and they had an article about President Trump's use of AI. And apparently back in July, he posted this GIF of President Obama being arrested. And of course, the New York Times, when they put stuff out, they always say generated by AI, and they put a big red line through it so that we don't get fooled. But I wanted to show you this GIF because there's an interesting thing about it, that this is one of the signs that you can look for if you're looking for AI. So, watch President Obama's hand. Do you see that little weird, like, you know, it looks bizarre? That's a sign of AI generation, and I'm going to talk about why. So, this is the agenda for the day. We're going to talk a little bit about my relationship to AI, then we'll talk about what AI is, what it can do, and a little bit about how it works. And then we're going to move to a particular type of AI called generative AI. That's what ChatGPT is. We'll talk about what it is, what it can do, and then strengths, limitations, implications and all that sort of thing. So my relationship to AI. As Christina said, I went to Dartmouth College. What you may not know is that Dartmouth is actually the birthplace of the phrase artificial intelligence. So in 1956, there was a summer institute, and one of the things that came out of that was this phrase, artificial intelligence. My own relationship with AI began in 1984 when I took a class in it. I tell you this because I think a lot of people think that AI is a new thing, and it's not. It's been around for a really long time. What's new is this generative AI stuff and our ability to gather lots and lots of data to do things, to generate new content. I went to Florida State, as Christina said, and both my master's thesis and my PhD dissertation were about building AI tools for microbiology kinds of problems. So in my master's thesis, I built an AI tool for classifying DNA from a particular fly. The fly carries a parasite that causes river blindness. So if we could classify where those flies came from, we might be able to mitigate their spread across, mostly these were DNA samples from Africa, so that we could prevent the spread of river blindness. In my dissertation, I worked on a classic problem in microbiology, which is the protein folding problem. I didn't solve it, it's a big problem. But I built a tool that would read a two-dimensional string of amino acids, and it would try to predict how that string of molecules would fold up into a three-dimensional structure. And if we could predict that, then we'd be able to solve, come up with new drugs for treatments for various diseases. 25 years after I defended my dissertation, that problem was actually solved by an AI tool called AlphaFold by a company that's owned by the same company that owns Google. So it's Alphabet. So I tell you all this because I want you to see AI has been around for a long time. We've been using it to do real problem solving for a long time. So let's talk about what AI is. One important thing to know about AI is it's not one thing. AI is actually a set of tools and techniques. It's called artificial intelligence because it simulates human intelligence. So the kinds of things that we think require human intelligence to do, artificial intelligence does. So things like recognizing speech, making decisions, and so on. And I'm going to talk about some of those examples. But there's also a whole bunch of different types of AI. So this is a partial list. Artificial neural networks, expert systems, genetic algorithms, brute force search algorithms. Anybody heard of Deep Blue?
Yeah.
So, yep. So Deep Blue was the first artificial intelligence tool that beat a grandmaster. This is an artificial intelligence tool that doesn't learn, it doesn't adapt, it just was really good at that particular problem by using search techniques. Most modern tools do learn. They adapt, they learn, they improve over time. This is called machine learning. And the way this works is you present the tool with a lot of data, like every document that you could find on the internet. You present the tool with all of that data, and it looks through it, finding statistical relationships in that data, looking for patterns in that data. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so then I asked ChatGPT, what is AI? And this is what it told us. The stuff in bold comes directly from ChatGPT. I kind of summarized the following paragraph to give you a sense of what it means. So, like I said, AI is not one thing. it's a spectrum. And what ChatGPT means by a spectrum here is that some of the AI tools that exist are pretty simple tools. Others are very complicated. So it's a spectrum, a range of complexity in the tools. It learns from our data. This is what ChatGPT tells us. And by that it means there's a lot of data out on the internet that we've put out there. You know, we put our resumes out there. Our Fitbit data is out there, right? The routes that we ride our bikes, things like that are out there. The AI tools are built so that they read that data and they look for patterns in it. And they use that statistical information to then make predictions about data that it hasn't seen before. I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about that because it's important. It doesn't think or understand anything. It's simply looking for statistical relationships. It can be both helpful or harmful. So helpful, you know, we have AI tools that can read X-rays and MRIs, and they're actually better than human doctors at finding diseases. We have AI tools that do climate modeling to help us predict where hurricanes are going to be and where tornadoes are going to pop up. But we also have deep fakes and other kinds of misinformation. So a deep fake is like that GIF that I showed you at the beginning. That's a deep fake. It's an image or a video or a sound clip that is designed to fool you into thinking that actual people said and did the things in the clip. This was interesting to me, the last two here, because it felt like ChatGPT was trying to assure me that I still am important, right? So human judgment still matters most. That ChatGPT tells us that AI doesn't replace thinking, it augments it. I'm going to give you some examples that maybe question whether that's true. And then this one is, I agree with this statement, but it's a strange one if you're asking what AI is. The future of AI is not just about technology. It's also about ethics and society and the value systems that we want to manifest in our world. So this is a thing that ChatGPT can do, right? It creates text, it creates answers for whatever questions you might have. So this is a little bit of a list of the kinds of things that AI can do. So you can present a bunch of images to AI, have it learn how to detect whether certain things exist in those images. So for example, finding tanks in satellite images. This was a big thing when I was in grad school. We would have thousands of images taken from satellites, and in military intelligence operations, we would want to know, are there tanks in these images or not? So you train the AI tool to find tanks, and it does really, really well. This is one of the stories we talked about a lot in grad school. So, you know, present the AI tool with images, says, yes, these images have tanks, these images don't have tanks. And it did really, really well. And then you present it with data that it's never seen before, a new set of images, and suddenly it did terribly. And what the researchers found was that what the AI had actually learned to detect was whether the image was taken on a sunny day or on a cloudy day. Because the images that it used for training, the satellite images were all taken on a sunny day, and the images with the tanks were all taken on a sunny day, and the images without tanks were taken on a cloudy day. It turns out that's an urban myth. It didn't actually happen, but it's instructive of the kinds of things that could happen. It's a plausible thing that could happen. As I said, AI tools can analyze medical images, and they actually are better than human doctors a lot of the time at finding things like tumors and cancers and things like that. They can play games like chess or Go. They can make decisions. So if you see a UPS truck driving around, most likely the packages in that truck and the route that the driver is following was all determined by an AI tool of some sort. This is one of my favorites. So we all know that AI, autonomous cars are a big deal right now. Well, this is not really a new thing. All the way back in 1995, a group of researchers from Carnegie Mellon's Nav Lab built a car that they drove from Pittsburgh to San Diego, where the car drove autonomously 97% of the time. When you read the papers that the researchers wrote about this, they said the only time they really didn't let the car drive was when there was lots of congestion. And that was because humans are unpredictable. So if there's lots of humans around, they didn't trust the car. Anytime you get a recommendation from Netflix or Spotify, that's an AI tool. Lots of traders use AI tools for making trades, stock trades. There's a famous example. In 2010, we had something called a flash crash. So AI tools are built, there's some that are built to detect when a particular stock is going down, starting to go down, and immediately send a sell command so that that stock gets sold. They also detect when a stock is immediately going up, and they immediately send a buy command so that the traders can make lots of money. Well, in 2010, an AI tool detected that some stocks were starting to go down, so they gave sell commands. Those sell commands caused that stock to go down further, so more AI tools gave sell commands. And it was kind of a runaway crash that happened in seconds because these decisions are made so quickly. So after that event, legislators put in some rules to not allow that to happen again. They had some limits on what AI tools could do, but those rules clearly weren't good enough because in 2015 we had another one. So then there's more rules. Increasingly we're hearing about people who are using ChatGPT and tools like that as therapy bots and chat companions. This is not a new thing. Back in 1966, a group of researchers created a tool called ELIZA. That tool was a therapy bot. You know, you chatted with it and it asked you questions. And the way it worked was it looked for particular keywords, you know, and repeated those keywords back to you like a therapist might. I have played with ELIZA, because you can find it out on the internet. And one of the things I said to it was, necessity is the mother of invention. And its response was, tell me about your mother. And then we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about generative AI and generating images and text and that sort of thing.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Question on the first one, the recognized objects in the images. You didn't say. You said that the sunny day versus it proved to be not what was really happening. What really happened to cause it to?
No, the story itself is an urban myth. So it is possible that you could. So the kind of AI that was. It's a black box. Like, you don't know, when you train it, you don't know why it's giving you the output that it's giving you. Tank, no tank. You have no idea why it's telling you that. And so this was a story that our professors would tell us as a way of getting us to be really careful about how we trained our AI tools. because it's so easy to make a mistake like that.
But did you ever find out why the first ones were very accurate and the next wasn't?
There was no experiment. It's an urban myth. The whole thing was made up as a way to tell us, don't do this, right? Because we're training tools, and it's really easy to make this mistake where your training data has something in it that because remember, all the AI tool is doing is it's looking for patterns. You don't know what pattern it's actually picking up. It's finding something, and then it's making recommendations. So the whole story is made up. I did not know that in grad school. It wasn't until later that I learned that. All right, this is the part of the talk that I'm most nervous about. But I think it'll be useful because I think it'll explain to you a little bit more about how things like ChatGPT works. So remember I said AI is not one thing. It's a set of tools and techniques. One particular tool that is an AI tool is something called an artificial neural network. ChatGPT is an artificial neural network, which is why I picked this as an example to try to explain to you how they work. So the idea of an artificial neural network is it takes lessons from how our brains work. So let's think about how our brains work. In our brains, we have billions of neurons that as we're thinking, they fire, right? They turn on, and they send chemical neurotransmitters across synapses to other neurons which fire. Does that make sense? Everybody understands that? Mm-hmm. In learning, what's happening is you're changing the strength of the connections between neurons in your brain. So that's called neuroplasticity, and you're actually, learning something, and the way it gets encoded in your brain is through the strength of the connections between neurons. So an artificial neural network uses those same ideas. In an artificial neural network, we have a bunch of neurons. That's what these circles are. They're neurons. They're connected to each other. These arrows are the synapses between the neurons. Each one of these arrows has a numerical weight on it that represents the strength of the connection between the two neurons at either end of it. So the strength of the connection between this neuron and this neuron is represented by a number on this arrow. Got that? Sure. So when you're building a tool, the first thing you have to do is teach it about the data that you want it to know about. So you have a bunch of data that is going to be called your training data. This is data that you know what you want the output to be, okay? So you give it the input, it makes a guess by doing lots of mathematical calculations through here, and it makes a guess as to what the output should be. You then compare what you know the output should be with what the output actually was from this network, right? You take the difference between those two things and you help the network learn by doing what's called backpropagation, which is take that error, that difference between the actual output from the network and what we want it to be, and send it backwards, changing the weights between these connections. When the hope is, when the network then sees that same data again, it will get closer to the actual output that we want, because we've changed the weights here. Make sense? Okay. Like I said, that was my scary part. So here's an example, an actual example of a neural network. 1986, called NetTalk. These researchers decided they wanted to build an artificial neural network that could learn how to read out loud. So they had a bunch of text, lots and lots of words, and they would present the text to the input units, the input neurons of the NetTalk network, 7 characters at a time. Okay, so space, I, space, C-O-U-L. 7 characters at a time. What they wanted the network to do was predict how to pronounce the middle character in this set of 7 characters. So, network sees this, it makes a guess, it does its calculations, it makes a guess as to how to pronounce it. That guess is called a phoneme, by the way. Speech is made up of lots of phonemes put together. K is a phoneme, t is a phoneme. All those little sounds that make up our words are phonemes. So we know that in this context should be pronounced k, right? As opposed to s, like, the S sound. And so the researchers trained this neural network, presented thousands of words, thousands of 7 characters at a time, had the network guess as to what the output sound should be, compared the guess to what it should actually be, take the error, back propagate it through, changes the weights on all this, so that the next time that the network sees this same sequence of characters, it's going to come closer to pronouncing it correctly. This is computationally intensive. This takes a lot of time. So both this picture and this formula come from the actual paper. That is just the formula for that back propagation, for changing the weights on the synapses between the neurons. There's more computation that has to happen, because before you can even get the data into the network, you have to encode it in a form that the network understands. And when the output comes out at the other end, you have to transform that into a form we understand. So this is more computation. My whole point here is computationally intensive. So let's actually watch NetTalk in action. You might have to see a little bit of an ad. Nope, looks like we won't. Okay. So what we're hearing here is before the network has been trained, we've given it some text, and it's making guesses as to how to pronounce each of the that middle character. It's making guesses. So what we're going to hear next is, after seeing 10,000 words, now, with all that learning happening, now let's hear how it's going to read this text.
We can't run. I like to go to my grandmother's house. Well, because she gives us candy. Well, we eat there sometimes. Sometimes we sleep overnight there. Sometime, when I go to my cousin's, there's just a thing.
Now what we're going to hear is, because remember, the way you do this is you train it on some data, then when you think it's good enough, you give it new data that it's never seen. So now what we're going to hear is it reading text that it's never seen before. It's been completely trained.
And stand in my family. My baby likes to look those I can't ever get to sleep for a minute. He won't stop jumping or running in the bathtub. In the bathtub? No. In the crib.
Kind of amazing, isn't it? Like, I just think that's really interesting. The reason that I chose this as an example to show you is because this is exactly how ChatGPT works, okay? Just bigger and more complicated. So ChatGPT is simply a large artificial neural network that's been trained to predict the next item in a sequence of items. So let me say that in a way that corresponds to how you might interact with it. When you use ChatGPT, you give it a prompt. that prompt is text, right? You write, create an image of a humanoid AI, right? That's a prompt. What ChatGPT does is, given that set of words, it predicts what the next probable word is. It's not even probable, plausible. It predicts the next item in the sequence of words. That will be the first word of your response, of the response that it gives you. Once it predicts that next word, it predicts the next word, and the next word, and the next word. Make sense? And then once it's trained, when you prompt it, it's gonna, so the training simply finds statistical relationships among words. ChatGPT has been trained on billions and billions of words. All the data on the internet, not really, but close to it. So it looks for, it has found statistical relationships between words, so it knows what the next probable word is for any prompt that you put in, and that's what it's telling you, the likely continuation of the pattern. And this is an important point. It does not keep copies of any of the data that it's read in. So it doesn't have, like, Sarah Silverman's Bedwetter memoir was one of the things that ChatGPT was trained on. It does not have a copy of Bedwetter stored anywhere. But it knows the statistical relationships among the words in that memoir. And so when you ask it a question about Sarah Silverman, it's going to go in there and look for what the next plausible words are. Now, the NetTalk network that I showed you had 3 layers of individual neurons. ChatGPT has 96 layers, and each of the layers is itself a neural network. So this is really complicated stuff that, you know, is, again, computationally intensive. I actually found a picture of ChatGPT on the internet. It's kind of the same as that NetTalk picture. Here's your inputs, there's your outputs up there. These are neural networks that are getting activated by whatever prompt you've put in. I'm going to stop there for just a second. Anybody have any questions about that? Lots of questions.
It's not necessarily about that, but it's making me wonder, do you have any examples of if this is used in criminology or detective work?
I don't, but I have other examples that I think you could then imagine how it might be used there and what the strengths and limitations might be of doing that. So,
Sometimes when I write a message on my computer or on my phone, the next word already appears, or the sentence, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not.
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And,
Yep.
and I have to make really sure to read it over.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yep. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yep.
So with,
Karen, yep.
so with regard to the neurons, the input and the output, can the human create the output to their advantage? And is that the caution that we have to watch out for?
So the answer to that question is kind of twofold. With artificial neural networks, you can't say this is what the output is going to be. Okay? With other tools, with other AI tools that don't work exactly like this, you can. So Expert Systems is a rule-based system. So depending on what rules you put in, you might be able to direct the output to be what, you know, a particular thing. Oh, now I can't remember my second point, the second part of that. Oh, but you can change the training data. In fact, this was a story I heard on my way here today. You can change the training data so that it affects the output. So, do you know Grok? Have you heard of this this generative AI tool? So this is Elon Musk's generative AI tool. And there was a situation a couple months ago, maybe in like August, where suddenly Grok was being incredibly racist, like just putting out all kinds of racist stuff. What had happened was Elon Musk didn't like the answers that Grok was giving to certain questions. It was too woke. So he had the training data changed, and in that version, the training data, I don't know what they used for training data, but it must have been incredibly racist and homophobic and, you know, all the things that you are scared about. So you can't, with artificial neural networks, you can't direct what the output is going to be exactly, but you can influence the kind of output that you're going to get by changing the training data. We're going to talk about that too in terms of bias.
Thank you.
So what was ChatGPT initially even developed for? What do you know what the actual initial purpose of it was?
So this kind of natural language processing tool has been a holy grail of AI research for as long as I've been part of it. So it really was to be able to have realistic conversations with an AI tool. I mean, it does exactly what it was designed to do, but yeah, but we'll talk about the but.
What does GPT stand for?
GPT stands, oh man, you know, I knew that. Something like generalized programmed tool or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the words are, but the word generalized or general is in there. Because that's one of the things about ChatGPT that's different than a lot of the other tools. Most neural networks are designed to do something that's very narrow, a very narrow task. ChatGPT is also designed to do a very narrow task, but it looks big to us because it's all about language processing, right? So it does language processing really, really well. It also does image processing pretty well, but that's because underneath it there's another neural network called DALL-E, DALL-E, that does the image generation. Okay, let's move on. I just wanted to make sure that you understood that, because I think it's going to make the rest of this make more sense. So what kinds of things can generative AI do? I'm going to start saying ChatGPT instead of that long phrase, generative AI, but there are tons of generative AI tools besides just ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT what an agenda for a session like this ought to be, and this is what it gave me. It's a good agenda. I think it's pretty good. You know, ChatGPT thinks you should know that AI is a pattern-based system, not a mind. I'm not even sure what exactly that means, the not a mind part of it. It generates new outputs, not copies. That's that idea that it's not storing any of the data, it's storing the statistical relationships among the data, so it really is generating new stuff. This is what I just told you about. I just copied that right onto my previous slide. The capabilities, you know, they're pretty good. It rapidly generates text, code, art, music, all kinds of stuff, right? It can summarize, brainstorm, and simulate reasoning, and it's great for creative exploration and productivity. I mostly agree with that. We're going to talk about this, right? The limitations, because I think that's kind of more interesting. And this we're going to talk about as well. So I then said to ChatGPT, give me a humanoid image of an AI. This is what it gave me. I said, give me a cartoon image of an AI. That's what it gave me. I said, give me a non-humanoid image of an AI, and this is what it gave me. It can do a lot, right? Like, these are very, very different images. But another thing that ChatGPT can do is it can make mistakes. So this is actually the warning. When you go into ChatGPT to put in your prompt, this warning is on there. It's in very small letters, but it's on there. ChatGPT can make mistakes because it is not about facts, right? It's just about relationships between words. It's just about, what have I seen, the pattern of words, and I'm going to reproduce that pattern, whatever it is, whether it is actually truthful or not. So this was what ChatGPT said we should talk about for limitations. I'm going to add this one at the bottom. It creates boring work as well. I'm going to give you an example. All right, so ChatGPT says that ChatGPT doesn't know truth from falsehood because it's just predicting plausibility. And there's lots of examples of that out on the web. So just this week, on Monday this week, I'm a board game geek, and so I belong to a lot of forums about board games. And so this was in one of the forums on Monday. When you're learning how to play a game, understanding the rules, because these are pretty complicated games, understanding the rules is kind of a challenging thing. And so this guy said that he wanted to use ChatGPT to, when he didn't understand something, he wanted to give a prompt to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT tell him what the rules are. But what he found was ChatGPT got the rules wrong, right? Because ChatGPT doesn't have a copy of the rules. What it has is statistical relationships between words. So if you ask it a question about rules, it's going to give you a plausible set of rules, a plausible thing, but not the actual rules. So this is why you have to be really careful about the output that you get from ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Is that because it doesn't, there's no history to it?
There's no history. It does
So
not.
it doesn't have history.
Right. Yep. So what it has is the statistical relationships between words from the billions of lines of text that it's read. That's all it has. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Could I
Yes.
say something? Excuse me. I have been interacting with the Grok AI, and on there, it's like when I ask something, I see that on the screen, it's it's supposedly thought bubbles, from what he says, and then also I could see that it goes out and it checks the internet and other sources, and then it'll come back with all of the trail of where it gathered the information to give the response that it gives.
So I don't use Grok, and so I can't speak to what they might have added to it to help with this fact checking. I'll check it out, but so you guys use Google for search, right? So when you do a search with Google and you get that AI overview, take a look at it sometime. There's never any links to anything, right? The reason is because it's generating that response with just the statistical relationships between words. But then Google will give you the actual links to stuff that's related. And Grok might be doing something like that. Having a follow-up step after the original AI gives an overview, a follow-up step where they go out and they try to find stuff that supports whatever it is that Grok has said.
That list comes up before he even gives the answer. So it appears that it goes out, checks all of the information, compiles that, and then comes back to give the answer that best fits.
Okay, I don't know Grok, so I have on sort of philosophical grounds not used Grok because of honestly that retraining to have less woke stuff I think is offensive. So I'll check it out. I don't know anything about it. Yeah.
I email in 2 languages, and sometimes I write something in English, and then I start typing a word, and it comes out in German, or vice versa. So that's sometimes very frustrating.
Yeah. So another thing that a lot of the tools will do is if it has your history, because like when you use ChatGPT, it will label each conversation you have with it, and it'll show you how you had a conversation, what the conversation was. It'll start to learn what you're looking for, right? So your German, mine never comes up in German, right? Because I don't type words in German. So it's learned that you sometimes do that. I saw another hand.
So,
yeah.
if you were to ask ChatGPT the exact same question, like twice in a row, or a week apart, or a month apart, would you get the same answer?
Sometimes and sometimes not, and I actually have examples. I'll show you some examples of that. But I want to talk about another famous case. You may not have heard about this, but a lawyer was submitting a brief in California for a lawsuit that he was working on, and used ChatGPT to generate the brief for him. And then the judge and the opposing lawyer said, we can't find any of these cases. Turns out he had used ChatGPT, which is not based on fact, right? It's all about statistical relationships between words. It had made up cases. It had made up cases. And he finally admitted that he had used ChatGPT and hadn't checked any of these cases. And so he got the largest ever fine, just in September, right? This is what I'm saying. Every day something new came up that I had to add to this talk. He got the largest fine of $10,000 for wasting the court's time. And, you know, who knows, he might get disbarred. So you can't, you gotta be really careful about what you believe from ChatGPT. So here's an example of what you were asking about. If you give it the same prompt over and over, is it gonna give you the exact same thing every time? And the answer for this case is gonna be no. But the problem with the training of these tools is any bias in the data is going to be reproduced in the outputs that you get. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? If you have a bunch of data that is used to train the ChatGPT and it's just looking for statistical relationships in that data, if there's bias in the data, statistically, you're going to reproduce that bias. So I asked ChatGPT to create me an image of a doctor. And this is what it came up with. And then I said, create an image of a doctor. So I asked the exact same question. And this is what it came up with. So you can see it's not exactly the same, right? But pretty similar, right? Pretty similar. And then I asked it again. And this is what it came up with. What do you notice about these three pictures? They're all men, right? Yeah, they're all men. And so the way the image processing part of ChatGPT was trained was it went out to the internet, gathered a whole bunch of images that had captions. So the captions probably had to have said doctor in them, right? And so if most of the images that you're using for training your data are of male doctors, then what you're going to get when you ask for an image of a doctor is a male doctor, right? Despite the fact that in 2022, 38% of doctors were women. But there probably are far, far fewer images out on the internet of women doctors that are captioned, because they had to be captioned to be used in the training data. So then I asked, show me an image of a nurse. What do you think happened? So I asked, and 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 I honestly have no idea what's going on with this. I don't know. She also has gloves or something that comes up over her elbows. I tried to look to see what her name is, but it's just gibberish. It's not actually a name. But, I asked a bunch of times and they were all women, despite the fact that 12% of US nurses are male. So the point here is, whatever your data has for biases, that's what your output from these tools is going to have for biases. That's why that story about satellite images taken on sunny days versus cloudy days is a useful lesson to be learned, right? Because it means pay attention to your data and try to make it as diverse as possible if you don't want this kind of stuff to happen. All right, now, here's the creates boring work. So I'm teaching a class where students are working on a project, and I want them to think about their majors and their life experiences that they're going to bring to the project that are going to benefit the project. I also want them to think about what they haven't experienced and what they might be able to learn from a project. So part of an assignment that I had given them was this prompt, so basically, think about your major, what have you learned in it, and how is this stuff gonna help with making the game that they're gonna make. It's a game that's gonna have some impact on the world. This is this semester, I gave this assignment. This is what one of my students submitted. And I have not edited this at all. This is exactly what the student submitted. Yeah, so it's clearly like a Mad Lib kind of a thing for an answer to this assignment that I had given him. He had just forgotten to fill in the Mad Lib, right? So clearly this is a problem. But what's more interesting to me was the 5 or 6 other students who submitted an answer very similar to this, but had remembered to go in and fill in the Mad Libs. Because what that meant was those 5 or 6 other students also had used ChatGPT, and they came up with virtually the same answer, just you fill it in, right? You fill in the details. So I had a conversation with my students then about, if you're looking for a job and you write a cover letter using ChatGPT and the job ad, your cover letter is going to look like anybody else who did that same thing. You're not going to stand out at all, right? So this to me is one of the real downsides of ChatGPT and our students using it. I then decided I was going to see how ChatGPT dealt with this. So I put the prompt in myself. Of course, it came up with that Mad Lib version of it. But then ChatGPT asked me this: do you want me to tailor this to your specific major? And I said yes. I said, my major is game design. The specific project theme for my project is education. And ChatGPT gave me this answer, which, is, if you just saw this might seem impressive for an undergraduate student to write. The problem with this is it uses none of the language that we use in the classes, right? So in the game design major, we do indeed talk about player motivation and engagement loops, but we never call them that. That's not the language we use to talk about those things. And it couldn't tell, when I said that the project was about education, it couldn't really tell what I meant by that. And so there's no way a student making a game that is trying to impact education is going to learn more about learning theory and assessment. It's not part of the project. So it missed the mark, right? Even though I said, yes, tailor this to my stuff. And the reason is, I'm going to say it again, all it knows is the statistical relationships between words, right? So it's not giving an answer that really makes sense in this case. Okay, so now let's talk about the ethical and societal implications. We've already talked about the bias and fairness. I'm not going to talk about that again. I think it's pretty clear. But I do want to talk about intellectual property, job transformation, misinformation risk. Those are what ChatGPT said we should talk about. I'm going to add one, a massive consumption of resources. All right, so let's talk about intellectual property. This is a big deal right now because the company that made ChatGPT, called OpenAI, admits that what they did was they went out to the internet and they gathered everything they could to train ChatGPT, right? Because it needs billions and billions of lines of text to train this thing. They admit that some of the information that they gathered was copyrighted information. What does copyright mean? It means you, as the owner of the copyright, have the right to control the copies of your work. So OpenAI is admitting they made copies of this work in order to train the neural network. It's a violation of intellectual property, absolutely. Well, I shouldn't say absolutely. The courts have not decided that yet. I think it's a violation of copyright, but courts haven't decided. The AI, so several of those people whose work has been taken as part of the training for ChatGPT are suing OpenAI for violations of copyright. The defense that OpenAI is putting out there is they're claiming something called fair use. So there is an exemption or an exception to copyright law under fair use. It's kind of complicated, but one of the things that's allowed is under fair use is you can transform the work so that it's a new thing and has a different meaning and purpose. So a good example of that is a parody. A parody of somebody's play might use the same character names and the same situations, but it's, you know, making it ridiculous in some way. That's an example of transformation of the material in this fair use kind of way. Did you want to?
So, my understanding of fair use from being in publishing for a bit is it's okay, for example, in an educational arena, but if you're making money off of something, that's not fair use.
Yep. we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
Does this have anything to do with like social media and Meta? How Meta like uses your photos? Like if you give them access to your photos, they can take them and alter them?
It's a little bit different because when you sign up to say use Facebook, you agree to the terms of service for using that tool. And part of that is you agree to Meta can use your stuff. So you have implicitly agreed to Meta using your stuff. This is about stuff that was just out on the internet that OpenAI did not ask. They didn't have anybody sign any terms of use or anything like that. So it's related, but it's a different situation. OpenAI is claiming fair use. There is precedent, actually, for this to work. Google has a books project where they have made copies of millions of books, and they're using them for indexing and searching and stuff like that. And the courts ruled in Google's favor that they did not violate copyright by doing that. I have not read the case, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the logic was there, but there is precedent for OpenAI's argument. But some of the critics point out that if you ask if you use certain prompts with ChatGPT, it will respond with virtually word-for-word text from their works. Sarah Silverman is one of them. She wrote this memoir called Bedwetter, and if you ask ChatGPT, I have done it, what did Sarah Silverman say in Bedwetter, it will reproduce her work almost directly. And you might wonder how that happens because it doesn't have a copy of her work. But you ask a very specific question about a very specific work, the statistical relationships are all within that work, right? And so it makes sense that in situations like that, it's going to reproduce the person's copyrighted work. So this is still in the courts. We don't know how this is going to come out. So job transformation, it's not about automation, it's about augmentation. So OpenAI and other companies claim this helps us think better, right? It adds to our thinking. And I would say, let's ask that lawyer from California if it added to his thinking, right? He was obviously using ChatGPT to replace his own thinking. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is I have started seeing certificate programs that are about engineering prompts for generative AI. So how do you write a prompt so that you get maybe more unique output and stuff like that? So I think this is an interesting trend. I don't know if these certificates are going to actually get people jobs or not because they're relatively new. There are dozens of them. I just picked 5 of them. There's way more than that. This is my favorite, though. This one was my favorite from Illinois Tech because of this disclaimer down here, which says, content for this post was originally generated by artificial intelligence tool, GPT-4. and then edits were made for accuracy. So, it is transforming a lot of people's jobs. It's making us work differently. So let's talk about misinformation. So ChatGPT tells us that synthetic media can blur the line between authentic and artificial content. Frankly, this is the stuff that scares me the most right here, because I think it's going to get us to a point where we can't trust anything that we hear, we see, we read. So I showed you a deep fake at the beginning, right? I'm going to show you another deep fake. And I'm going to warn you, there's some profanity in this one. It looks like we're going to have to see a little bit of an ad.
What's up, Zach?
Check out this echo. T-Mobile's got home internet, and it's just $35 a month.
Our echoes are all knowing. T-Mobile's got home internet, just $35 a month, and it's guaranteed for 5 years.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. It's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you, and stay woke, bitches.
So that deep fake is from 7 years ago, and it's just gotten better. The technology has just gotten better. Lynn?
So, in that clip, did it actually look like Obama
Yes.
was speaking?
Could you not
No,
see
no,
it?
no,
Oh,
we couldn't see it. We couldn't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Huh, that's strange, because it was showing on my thing here. It was actually Obama saying those words. It looked exactly like Obama. And then Jordan Peele comes in, and he's actually mouthing the words. I apologize, I didn't realize that you hadn't seen it. To me, that one is a little bit obvious because of it just felt a little fake. But in the 7 years since that was made, because that was from 7 years ago, the technology has just gotten better and better. New Hampshire plays a role in this as well. So in 2024, there were robocalls sent out to Democratic voters, right, telling people, President Biden telling people, don't vote in the primary. You're, causing problems if you vote in the primary. And this guy, Stephen Kramer, who was the one who perpetrated this particular situation, claimed he was just trying to warn people about the dangers of deep fakes. It really did sound like President Biden. I looked for a clip of it and I couldn't find it. It really did sound like President Biden. But then he also claimed it didn't matter because, of course, the DNC at the time didn't recognize that primary. Of course it does matter. This case has already been through the courts and he was found not guilty. I have not read the case and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the logic was, but I feel like it's a dangerous precedent, right, that we're allowing this stuff to happen. I'm going to show you one more deep fake. This is an example which shows President Trump being arrested, and it looks real. But I like this example because there's some things you can look for to find deep fakes, because the way images are created, you put in a prompt, and what the AI is going to do is it's going to predict what the first pixel of the resulting image should look like. And then it'll predict the next pixel, and then the next pixel, just like when it was predicting the words. And so if you look at this one, I don't know if you can see it, but there's something weird going on with their legs here. Like, you know, their legs are not, they don't make sense, because this is not about fact, right? It's just about statistical relationships between the pixels. And so this is kind of a plausible image of President Trump being arrested. I find this terrifying because you always say, well, I saw it with my own eyes, and here, just because you saw it doesn't mean it was real, you know, and I'm not sure how we get out of that. And then I want to talk about one issue that ChatGPT did not say we should talk about, and that's the consumption of resources to run all of the computers that are responding to our prompts. One of the resources that is really, really massive in the use of AI tools is electricity. So remember, I showed you the NetTalk thing, and that was computationally intensive. These generative AI tools are way more expensive in terms of things like electricity, because the computation required is huge to respond to a single query, a single prompt. There's not a lot of data out there about how much electricity is used in using these tools, but there are a couple of reports. So here's one report that I found that tried to make some estimates about the consumption. And so if you look at this diagram here, this bar, this is what the amount of electricity used by traditional data centers. This is from 2022. Amount of electricity used by traditional data centers, and this is in terawatt hours. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then this is what cryptocurrencies used in 2022. Everybody knows that, right? Bitcoin and that sort of thing. They require huge amounts of electricity. And then there's a little thing up here that is the dedicated AI data centers. It's not very big at all. But then we move to 2026, and what the estimate is, you can see that there's growth in all three of the areas. But I just want to talk about this. For traditional AI data centers, how much electricity is going to be used. If you look at the scale, it's about 100 terawatt hours, okay? So that didn't mean anything to me. I didn't understand what that meant. So I looked up and found that 1 terawatt hour powers 1 million US homes for a year, right? And I also looked up, there are 132 million homes in the United States. In 2026, we're going to be using almost as much electricity for these traditional AI data centers, for these AI data centers as every home in the United States uses in that entire year. Wow. Yeah. And that's only going to get worse, right, as these things grow. The other resource that is, I think, worth looking at is water. So because these are such computationally intensive tasks, and these computers are running a lot, they need to be cooled. So there's an estimate, again, there's a lack of data about this, and so you can only find a couple of reports, but the estimate is that there's two types of water that's used in these data centers. I want to talk about just the one for cooling. It's a little bit easier to understand. The estimate is that it takes 9 liters of water per kilowatt hour to cool a computer, okay? 9 liters per kilowatt hour. If you do the math, because we saw how much electricity we think we're going to be generating, right? If you do the math, by 2027, it's predicted that we're going to use 6.6 billion cubic meters of water just for cooling these data centers. Again, that didn't mean anything to me. So one household consumes on average between 200 and 400 cubic meters of water per year. Another way of saying that is by 2027, 16.5 million households will use the same amount of water as what we're using for cooling of these AI data centers. Huge amount of natural resources. And most of the water for the cooling is potable water. So this is water people could actually be drinking. So the Young Ladies Library Association sent me a list of questions, and I wanted to make sure I hit them. So I've got them. So where does AI get its intelligence? It depends on the tool. So I've talked a lot about neural networks. It gets its intelligence by finding statistical relationships between the data that it's trained on. But other systems get their intelligence from other sources. So expert systems, for example, gets its intelligence by encoding the expertise of experts into rules. Is it really able to reason? No. Is any of its reasoning based on an established value system? And this one I have to qualify a little bit, right? Because the answer is no, except in the training data. So whatever value system is in the training data is going to be reproduced in the AI tool. And is this the same as chatting with a bot? Chatting with a bot is one type of AI, right? Because it's responding to you by predicting what the next word is and what the next word after that will be. And then, so AI scams people. Those deep fakes, right? They get used to scam people. Would it be possible to train an AI to scam the scammers? And I think it's an interesting question. I'm not sure really what scamming the scammers means, but we do use AI tools already to find scams. So I don't know if any of you have gotten calls from your credit card company saying, hey, was this really you? Did you really purchase this at BJ's or whatever? They're using AI tools to find anomalies in your pattern of purchasing. And the problem with that, though, of course, is that we're always one step behind because we're looking for statistical patterns in past data. And if the scammers come up with something new, we don't have the data to actually be able to train and get statistical relationships and things like that. I would say and this is true for any kind of potential scamming, just beware of any interaction that you did not initiate, right? And many scams rely on building trust, and so if you didn't initiate something, what they're going to try to do is talk to you in a way that makes you trust them and build on that relationship, and that's when they get you, right? And any hints to detect when AI is being used? I showed you a couple of things to look for in those deep fakes, right? But it depends on what your context is for what you might look for. So some sites always label their AI content. New York Times is one of them. It's always labeled. You look for things like, a person who has 6 fingers, right? Because that's one of the common mistakes that AI makes. Weird lighting. So if, there's a shadow for one person going this way and the shadow for the other person goes this way, that's a likely sign of AI being used. And in the education realm, I always look for language that we don't use in the class, right? That if it's using language that we have not talked about, then I often think, okay, they've used AI in some way here, and I need to have a conversation with the student. So that's all I have. I am happy to take questions. Yes, Karen.
Kathy, where are these data centers?
They're all over the place. Unfortunately, a lot of them are in remote places like deserts. So if you think about water use in a desert, it becomes even much more of a problem. Were any of you impacted by the tech problems on Monday? Yeah? So, this is not an uncommon thing that a company has these large data centers all over the place. So what happened on Monday was Amazon's large data centers went down for some reason. We haven't heard why yet. And so what that meant was because so many, and there are dozens of them all over the world, not just in the United States. So if a company had their data on one of those server farms, their sites were down as well. So they're all over the place.
And one local, the Meredith Village Savings Bank was a local concern that was affected by that.
Yeah, there were, I mean, we on campus didn't have access to a lot of our ed tech tools all day Monday. Yep. Jeanette?
When you go to log in someplace, you're asked to check to see if you're a robot, and it'll be like, pick out pictures of bicycles. I'm curious, like, if we can have bots that can identify images, how is it different? How is it proving that it's a human? Do you know what I mean?
I do. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure. I think the answer probably has to do with incentive, right? Like, does someone have incentive to fake, those are called CAPTCHAs, right?
Yeah.
Does someone have incentive to fake the CAPTCHA, or is it better to go to something easier to do? So I honestly don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody else know? Yeah, go ahead, Gretchen.
I don't know the answer to that. It's a different question. I was wondering about like the future of education and technology and jobs. One of, I guess, being uneducated about AI, one of my thoughts was, what would the future for MIT students be? Does this create just a different field for them to be in, or would that change the difference between what humans do and what AI does?
So, are you asking MIT graduates who might work in the field?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think technology fields tend to be fairly robust. I say tend because you always have like we had the .com bubble, right, where lots of tech things went under. I think right now we're in an AI bubble, right? Any company that says they're using AI, their stock skyrockets, even if it makes no sense for them to be using AI. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think already there are new kinds of jobs that people are doing, but AI's been around for a long time. So if we're talking about engineering graduates and computer science graduates, they've been entering this field for a long time. But yeah, there's demand for that. I saw Gigi.
Yes, I want to come back to that Amazon thing on Monday. Mm-hmm. I had some troubles with my smartphone, and I thought it was my phone, mm-hmm. and I was going to come down to the help desk, mm-hmm. but by the time I got ready to go, it was okay again. Yep. So that explains it,
yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah, it affected all kinds of things.
So one of the things that's happened recently is, scads, hundreds of people are signing documents trying to prevent AI from getting to a point where I guess it's sentient. What is that all about? And is there a real risk there that it could, end humanity?
Yeah, regular Thursday night, let's talk about that. Sentience is an interesting thing, right? Like, if I look at Gretchen, how do I know she's sentient? Right? The only way I know is because of her outward behavior, right? The way she responds. So how would we know that a computer is sentient? I think we'd have to look at its outward response, right? Right now, I think it's fairly easy to see even something as sophisticated as ChatGPT is not sentient. And we know that because you can kind of fool it to do things, right? Like if you ask your prompts in certain ways, you can kind of fool it. Although I suppose I could fool Gretchen too. So I mean, I don't know. I think it's highly unlikely we're going to end humanity, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah,
for me, it really blurs the lines on what is thought. Like I thought, this is not thought. This is data relational. But so then what is thought? Mm-hmm. This has changed. Is thought exclusively human anymore?
You are all very deeply philosophical.
Not really funny.
I don't think we know what thought is in our own brains, right? Great point. I don't know what to say to that.
Is this doing what I do in my brain?
No. So a good example of this is that Deep Blue, right? Deep Blue was a AI tool that was designed specifically to play chess, and it beat a grandmaster. So let's think about how that's different than a human playing chess. First of all, the AI tool has a very, very narrow area of expertise, and that's true of all AI tools, right? Even ChatGPT has a very narrow area of expertise. Its area happens to be language generation, which feels big, but that's all it can do. It can't, it can't do a bunch of other stuff. So the way that Deep Blue worked is it built, so when you play chess, you make your first move, and then there's only a certain number of moves that you might make next, right? And then you make that next move, and then there's only a certain number of moves that you might make next. You can build a decision tree, right, where you give all the possible moves for the first move, and then when that person makes that move, you cut off parts of the decision tree because they didn't make that decision. So that's called a search tree, right? And the way Deep Blue worked is it followed paths through this big search decision tree that was built by chess experts. That is not how humans play chess. And we can't do that. We don't have the capability. We're much better at having what we call heuristics, which are kind of rules for simplifying things, where we prune off a whole bunch of possibilities and only focus on ones that are significant. The way we go about playing chess is very, very different than Deep Blue. Now, of course, since generative AI tools, artificial neural networks in particular, since they've become more and more popular, most chess playing algorithms now use a combination of the decision tree stuff, but also learn. They learn from having played a billion chess games, and they get better at it. So mostly no, it's not. The AI doesn't work. We don't think exactly how our brains work. It is.
I just think also it's different is part of the human experience of playing chess, playing with a human who enjoys playing chess.
You mean paying attention to your opponent and who your opponent is and that sort of thing?
And even more simple than that, just why do you play chess? What is the purpose of playing chess? And I think there is an element of sort of personal, individual challenge there and competition, but I think ultimately you sit down to play chess with another person to have an experience with another person.
Whereas AI doesn't experience, right?
Right,
It just does.
you know that about Big Blue, Deep Blue. Deep Blue, you know that about Deep Blue. So I don't know, I guess it's just, to me it seems like, why would you wanna
these are,
you'd want to do it once maybe because it's novel and you're I'm gonna beat it, right, or be beaten by it. But then when I think about sustainability of I don't know, it seems boring and boring.
Boring, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
What protects AI? If AI goes awry, and goes completely, it becomes non-functional and spreads information through a world. How is it controlled? Is it flipped? Is there a portion of the system that's flipped and restarted?
Depends on the context, depends on the tool. So
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, so how is AI kept in check? How does, if it starts going awry, how do we stop it? I'm sorry, I should have been doing that all along. The best example we have of that is those flash crashes of the stock market that I was talking about. Luckily, in 2010, so the stock market dropped precipitously, seriously, in seconds, right? Because these tools act really, really quickly. Luckily, somebody noticed what was going on and shut things down. I don't know if it was a kill switch in the software, if there's they unplugged the machine, I'm not sure about that. But then what happened was, the response was, let's put in place regulations about the use of AI to try to prevent this from happening again, because it's not good for anybody if there's one of these flash crashes. It was ineffective because we had another one in 2015. So that, ChatGPT told us that the future of AI is not just technological, it's also ethical and about values and society. And these are the questions I think that we need to be grappling with, and I'm not sure we are. I'm not sure we're, right now everybody is so excited about AI, right? All the tech bros are like, I've put AI into this coffee machine. It's out of control. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for us to figure out how to deal with it. I just worry in the meantime we are destroying the environment, and we're teaching students that they don't have to think and they can just put stuff into ChatGPT, and I mean it's an uphill battle for sure to fight against it, which is why I'm glad there's this many people here to talk about these things and to think about it, and I mean, I don't know exactly what we can do about it, but these are really important questions.
Thank you, Kathy.